the hustling, all the work, from working the corner for Breeze and Kanan.
Why wouldn't you want to take out the boss? It's the same you did to Breeze.
We knew this guy Breeze when we were kids. He came up with Ghost. He said the kid had the ability to disappear.
Your pops knew the Breeze would be here at 7 o'clock, watch Jeopardy. So Ghost came up after school, we broke in. We waited for him to come home and watch TV. Breeze didn't have time to get scared.
What Kanan didn't know, what Kanan couldn't tell you, is that I gave Breeze one more chance. I asked him to change his mind. He didn't.
Now, for a very long time, the Power fans have been asking the all-important question dating all the way back to 2014, to this moment where he was mentioned back in Season 1, Episode 1. Ghost mentioned they used to wear the corners for Breeze and Kanan, all the way to Kanan giving part of Breeze's backstory in conversation with Tariq, to then Ghost's version of events, which actually played a part in Tariq killing Ghost. He was said to be in the way of Tariq's future, just like Breeze was said to be in the way of Ghost's. And we finally got the introduction to Snaps and Pops' nephew, introducing Branford Frady, also known as Breeze. However, Episode 10 was a lot more than just the introduction to Breeze. It was about the monster inside of Rock, the weight she carries, and the huge cliffhanger going into the last and final season for Raising Kanan. For those who may not have caught the news, Season 5 will be the last. So, will Rock survive? How does Breeze influence Kanan? When will he learn the truth about Snaps and Pop? When will Kanan go from being the manipulated to the manipulator? Have we finally started to see the tear in his and Duke's relationship? What happens with Lou and what happens with Marvin? Definitely a lot to unpack for Raising Kanan, Season 4, Episode 10. Gimme the weight. Now this episode picks up with Kanan already hearing the news about Crystal, and of course he is angry. This is someone that he deeply cared about. For Kanan to open up to Crystal about his feelings, what he was going through with his moms, that's a big thing for Kanan. So circling back to episode 10, we saw him tearing shit down in his apartment, throwing things across the room. Even Duke was taken aback by his reaction. We had the older Kanan's narration warning that this was a lesson, the lesson of emotional suppression, that will eventually shape Kanan's evolution into the calculating character we saw on Power. It also reflects on the influence of Snaps and Pop who are mentoring Kanan. Wendell Pierce did say in one of his interviews, it's not what the crisis is, it's how you respond. And this narration warns Kanan's younger self, you can't respond emotionally or with anger, because sometimes that can be used against you, you have to keep it all inside, just like Duke does, just like Rock does. So it's not just a narration that talks about what Kanan went through in his younger years, but it also applies to Rock and many other situations. For Rock, you look at the situation with her pregnancy, she only told Duke. You look at how Lou told Kanan about how Rock was the one who was able to do what him and Marvin couldn't. She took all that weight. Again, going back to the episode title, Gimme the Weight. She keeps all that inside and suppresses her emotion. But we'll definitely come back around to Snaps and Pops' influence a bit later on, because as we learned a bit later, their influence in the wider Power universe really is huge, in more ways than one. Now Kanan does actually say something very similar to what Tariq said back in Season 1 of Ghost. It's not just about Crystal, it's about everyone. Everything or anybody that he's ever cared for gets taken away from him. Tariq said something very similar to Monet in Season 1 of Ghost, and don't think I'm comparing Raising Kanan to Ghost, we know they're on two complete different levels. But we do often talk about the similarities between Kanan and Tariq. Why Kanan took such a liking to Tariq? Well, this can be another. In Power, a lot of the times Tariq blamed Ghost. In Raising Kanan, we all knew who Kanan was about to throw the blame towards, Rock. So, coming to the situation with Rock. Towards the end of episode 409, we saw Rock walking into the Dragon's Lair with Lou. The questions of course were, what were Rock's intentions? How was she going to approach someone who isn't exactly the same as before? Someone you can't exactly reason with. The reason why she was actually here was because she saw Kanan coming out of Unique's tailor shop towards the end of episode 409, and that's something Rock wasn't going to have, Unique messing with Kanan. She tells him that this shit is between him and her, it's not got nothing to do with Kanan. However, he does rightly remind her of something he said way back in Season 1.
That nigga been in this shit before he was even in this shit.
Kanan's been in this shit before he was even in this shit. He was Defcon and Rock's son, the prince to the queen. Again, Defcon was also mentioned later on by Snaps and Pop, or as we know him, Detective Howard's son. But Unique definitely was right. Kanan is in this because of Rock. You look at what she had him doing way back in Season 1. She's also the one who put the gun in his hand. Of course, it is always important to look at different perspectives, We can also look at Kanan's role, him giving Rock no choice, his stupidity, a lot of his mistakes. But at the end of the day, just like Crystal told her in episode 408, you have to take accountability, which also applies to Kanan. He also has to take accountability for his actions, as much as Rock has to do with hers, with Unique telling her in episode 10, she ain't shit as a hustler or as a mother. Now Unique also dropped a little secret about his and Rock's relationship they had back in season 3. And as much as we talk about Unique being different, he definitely is, but this was classic Unique, telling Lou about how he was sleeping with his sister. However, one thing that Unique doesn't know at this moment in time, which may or may not come out in season 5, was the fact that Rock was pregnant and he would have been the father, so definitely one to keep in mind heading into next season. However, over here, he also came after Lou. He had no idea he was back in the game because the last he heard, he was a drunk, which was for majority of season 3. But we all know Lou. We saw his dark turn in episode 408, and Unique knows all about what Lou can do. It's why he tried to flip him back in season 1. Now Rock's response was, family is fair game. If Unique is going to come after Kanan with all the talk about him coming to the tailor shop to potentially team up and work together, then Rock was going to go after his. And by going after his, she meant Panessa and Jerome. After she gave Unique his final warning, she told Lou to target Panessa and Jerome, find out where they were staying. Law 33 from the 48 Laws of Power, they needed to target one of his thumbscrews. So, a bit later on, we saw Lou scoping Panessa's mom's house back in Queens, and this is why Unique did what he did back in 407, putting her out in this apartment in Manhattan. They dropped the hint about Panessa's mom not being too well, and having to go to the doctors regularly for checkups, but Unique mentioned that he'll have one of his guys do it for Panessa. However, after Lou followed them to the hospital, he got eyes on Panessa and got the location of where she was staying. Now in terms of their operation, we had Marvin coming to see Stefano to try and smooth things over after everything that happened with the Howard Beach situation and early Tyler, but too little too late. He said it was a bad idea to get into business with Rock in the first place, and it was definitely a mistake in getting into business with Marvin. He told him that their business was now finished. No trucks, no boats, their business was now done. There's no fixing this. However, with what we saw play out a bit later on with Phil Russo turning on Stefano, and also the fact that he's actually got a bit of a thing for Rock, it has been mentioned in a couple of interviews that Stefano does have a thing for Rock. Maybe it is something that they can use in season 5 to their advantage, because after all, we all know Phil Russo missed. Again, we will come back around to that when we talk about Phil Russo's dirty move. With Rock, she met with Erwin at one of her Chinese restaurants, where he told her something very similar to what Stefano told Marvin. Their business arrangement with his Chinese restaurants was over. After he heard what happened to Quan, that was the last straw. Back in 403, he wanted out back then, which is when he heard about Richard and Sonny. The problem was, at the time Rock strong-armed him. However, going back to the theme of thumbscrews and number 33 from the Laws of Power, this time around, he was ready for Rock. He had his family sent back to China, and with Erwin, he said do as you please, I'm old. However, he did give Rock a stern warning about who she is. In Chinese mythology, there's a monster called Hundun, excuse the pronunciation, but he mentioned this monster is blind, deaf, a faceless demon. Hundun is chaotic and evil. Now how this relates to Rock, Erwin was saying that she was no different. She's chaotic, a monstrous force, who over the course of 4 seasons of raising Kanan, has mirrored the mythical being Erwin was talking about. Her role as a drug queenpin, some of the things that she's done, and had other people do for her. But it wasn't just about Erwin realizing the monster in Rock, there was also Duke. She said something very similar later on in episode 10. Just because Rock wasn't seeing Duke, it doesn't mean that Duke wasn't seeing Rock for who she was. In fact, she had the best seat in the house. She could see Rock better than anyone. So speaking of Duke, let's talk a little about what Kanan and Duke got up to in the aftermath of finding out about Crystal's death. Garcia came back around to question Duke, which we always knew he would. Back in 409, Duke approached Garcia for answers, where he actually mentioned, now that he's done her a favour, he is going to be expecting one in return. Lou mentioned back in season 1, a favour is just a way for someone to have you under their thumb. And even though we didn't see him come back for that favour at the end of season 4, no doubt he will be back in season 5. Although while he was actually here, he came to question Duke about Crystal's death. He said that she was a person of interest, because someone that matched her description was seen at the scene of the crime. Now of course we know it wasn't Duke, it was Pop, but to law enforcement, we know what they were getting at, and so did Duke, so in classic Duke fashion, she gave him the big fuck you. But this wasn't the last we heard of Garcia in episode 10. He also told something very similar to Kanan a bit later on, which he ran with. Now with Kanan, he went to go visit his grandma's grave. From earlier on in season 4, we know he was quite close with Joyce Thomas. He went to her when he was writing his paper with E-Train, took care of her when she revealed she had cancer, and also opened up to her about Rock back in 402 and 403. Joyce's advice at the time, no matter what Rock has done, she is still his mother, and also her daughter. A lot of the things that she's done in and around Kanan has been to protect him, and actually stems from a lot of his mistakes. Rock has definitely done wrong, no doubt, but she's also done a lot to protect Kanan. However, in Kanan's mind at this moment in time is the death of Fame, the death of D-Wiz, what she did back in season 1, the death of Detective Howard, his father, and now the death of Crystal. He was pointing the finger in Rock's direction for all of those murders, but in reality, D-Wiz was because of Kanan's stupidity back in season 1, episode 1, and Detective Howard, well, it was either a choice between him or Marvin. There was also lying about Scrappy and a lot more manipulation, but we will come back around to Kanan and Rock, because at this moment in time, he tells Joyce, way too much has happened, and he didn't know what he was going to do at this moment, but he is going to need her to forgive him for it. And when he said this, it should have rang the alarm bells. We should have all known what was coming towards the end of the episode. Now, he was also still on the hunt for Crystal's killer. He came to see Purcell, who looked quite shook to see Kanan, and this is why. But he's had nothing because Pop did a really good job in covering her tracks, or leaving her body to be found so Kanan could throw the blame in Rock's direction. She even mentioned to Kanan when he came back to them, why is he done with the information that they gave to him about Rock being the one to call the hit on Fame? And Pop is a character who really is turning the screw. A character who's about to have a really increased influence heading into season 5. We all heard about what Kanan said during this conversation. He actually questioned their intentions. Over the past few weeks, I've been going through various different quotes from Wendell Pierce and Erica Woods, how they see him, how they want to mentor him, guide him, use him, and control him, because to them, he definitely has a bright future, but someone who can be a very good investment, a probationary investment. They were testing Kanan as well as mentoring him and guiding him, but more importantly, they want to control him. From Pop's perspective, Rock's biggest weakness is her inability to control Kanan. The fact that her son is making all these deals without her approval makes Pop confident she has the upper hand. So you do get the feeling that the tide is shifting. There's going to be a real battle for Kanan like there was a battle for Tariq in Power. There was a real tug of war between Ghost and Kanan. And everything that we're seeing Kanan go through here, especially with Snaps and Pop, the writers really have cleverly reverse engineered a lot of what we saw from the older Kanan back in Power. Now this is also where it was revealed that his father Defcon used to work for them. It was said he made a lot of money for them back in the day. They said he was a man of dignity, integrity, and a businessman of the highest order, and they were honouring him by honouring Kanan, because legacy matters. However, what they didn't actually know is, Defcon isn't actually Kanan's father, Detective Howard was. Not many people actually know this secret, and this conversation shows why Rock kept that hidden for so many years. Again, going back to one of the many points of how Rock did protect Kanan, it's why Rock gave Kanan Defcon's surname. It's a name that carries a lot of weight. We saw it back in Book 2 Ghost when Zion took the meeting with Tariq. He took the meeting because he knew who his father was. Ghost was respected, Ghost was feared. But the surname Stark, that name also has a lot of respect, because if you have Snaps and Pop honouring Defcon through Kanan, legacy definitely does matter. Ironically, fast forward to Power, Sean Stark was someone who wasn't able to hold the same weight as Kanan was in terms of the surname Stark.
Sean wasn't built like us. He was weak. He was disloyal. Maybe if it was different, he'd still be alive. You more my son than he ever was.
Now with Duke and Rock, we know they have a different kind of relationship, a special relationship. It grew over the years when Marvin was inside prison. They share secrets like they did back in 401. But Duke genuinely started to question Rock's involvement and whether she could have had a hand in Crystal's death. For Duke's entire life, she sat back and watched what her family's done without saying a damn word. But the only time she did notice her was when she was next to Kanan. When we watched episode 401, it was all about perspectives, and this was Duke's. It definitely is important to understand how she feels. She probably feels it's not being genuine from Rock, because every time she talks to Duke about what's going on, it always leads back to the question of what's Kanan up to, check up on Kanan, look after Kanan. However, whose responsibility is it to actually look out for Kanan? What did Crystal say to Rock back in 408? She has to take more accountability. Now we can also look at the other side to this. Over many years I've been basing my breakdowns on various perspectives, so it's only fair that we look at Rock's. Again, if we go back to what Lou said, Rock takes a lot of the weight for the family and her decisions. Whether they're right or whether they're wrong, she holds it and takes it on the chin, just like she had to do with the decision of killing Scrappy. So, Rock has been there for Duke. She raised Duke when Marvin wasn't around, when Kenya left them. When Kenya re-entered Duke's life back in season 2, Rock didn't exactly get involved, but did kinda just subtly warn Duke about Kenya. Her love for Duke really is genuine, even though most of their conversations do tend to lead back to Kanan, and you could really tell this hurt Rock, especially because this conversation also goes back to what Erwin said earlier on, the Chinese mythology. Just because Rock didn't see Duke, it doesn't mean that Duke didn't see her. She definitely saw Rock, maybe better than anyone. And this really was the first time we've seen Duke and Rock in a conversation like this, where they've been at each other's throats. Rock even responded by telling Duke she's just like Marvin, sloppy and jumping into shit. Although I do think after Duke's conversation with Marvin, someone who she really does trust, after she told him about her meeting with Rock, her asking about Fame and Crystal, Marvin saying there's no way Rock wouldn't have done that. If Rock had anything to do with both those murders, he would have known. I do think Duke started to come around to the idea maybe Rock wasn't involved in Fame or Crystal's death. So, speaking of Crystal's death, they actually went to go see their old manager who led Butter back in season 3. She heard about what happened to Crystal, and she wanted to check on both Aisha and Duke. And it's not often where we do see someone checking in on Duke, if you've actually noticed. Normally people do ask Duke how she's doing. We saw Marvin do it back in 405. That's after she got her first kill, but it really doesn't happen often. But this also goes back to Kanan's narration. On the blocks, feelings is weakness, because when you're feeling, you ain't thinking. And when you ain't thinking, you're a mark. You keep everything bottled inside you until you can't keep it there no more. That's what Duke does. She keeps things locked up and buried, but there will come a time in the future where she can't keep it inside. They've already given us a teaser for season 5, and now that they've also announced season 5 is the last one, I do think Marvin's death will be one of those moments. Now speaking of Marvin, I think we all knew this was coming in some shape or form, the death of Ellie Tyler. Snitches in the world of power gotta go, and we all know how Marvin feels about snitches. He also knows he made a mistake when he just took out Londell, and even though he was a little too late, Ellie Tyler still had to go, so he found him in a motel hiding, and this time around he did what needed to be done, and he also got rid of the loose ends. With Unique, he came to see Mrs. Baselli again. The reason why he was here and not Phil Russo's was because he could play on Teresa's heartstrings, and you can't do that with someone like Phil Russo, and also because Phil Russo was actually working with Stefano. But he played on the fact she lost Marco and Sal in season 2 and 3, knowing that she'd go to Phil Russo to push him to get revenge for Sal Baselli, which in turn would hopefully give the go-ahead for Unique in terms of New Jersey going to cause smoke in Queens. However, as we learned, Phil Russo was actually the one who came to Stefano to get rid of Sal Baselli in the first instance. He wanted Sal gone so he could take his position. Like Rock won back in 302, and as I've been warning for majority of season 4, these Italians are real slime balls. They'll find all kind of workarounds to stab each other in the back, without getting their hands dirty themselves. And how did they do it back in season 3? They used Marvin and the Thomases to do their dirty work for them. Just like Phil Russo mentioned, they thought using them would give the appearance that they were going toe-to-toe, without them actually going toe-to-toe. This is also where it started to take a turn because Stefano didn't appreciate the fact Phil Russo did step into Queens, which was through Unique. And when he threatened Phil Russo that he'd make it public, he was the one behind the hit on Sal Baselli. We saw Phil Russo stabbing Stefano, which actually reminded me of the time Dre stabbed Father Callahan back in Power, leaving him on the bench as well. Now at this moment in time, Rock and Marvin had no idea what happened to Stefano. Even though Phil Russo did fail to finish the job, Stefano cut them off. They had a hell of a lot of product from Hafiz and the Afghans, but no transportation, no backing from Stefano. They were wide open. This is also where she came for Marvin. Rock confronted him about going behind her back, which is what Stefano wanted. He told her back in 409, Marvin stepped to him about taking Rock's position, which is why I questioned Marvin's decision not to tell Rock the truth back in 407. That's when he should have laid out all the cards on the table, but he didn't. And now Rock really was going for him. So, just sticking with Marvin for a second. When Aisha and Duke were finished getting busy in the bedroom, Duke said that she can't leave New York. Even if she has the grades or there are good scholarships, she can't leave New York because of Marvin. He's the one who had her back. He may be stubborn, but he did change for Duke. She needs to be here to watch Marvin because if she doesn't, nobody will. Again, I just want to go back to that scene from season 5. I know I am jumping ahead a bit, but I do think they're laying the breadcrumbs and the foundations for what's coming, and it really is going to break Duke. It's the last piece she has left. But let's move on to Kanan's conversation with Lou and the all-important meeting between Kanan and Breeze. Now, when Kanan came to see Lou at Cafe Vu, he told him that the moves that he makes now will dictate the moves that he makes forever. It's very similar to what Snap said back in 404, but with very different intentions. Just recently in my preview for episode 10, I also mentioned that Kanan has lacked a father figure for a large portion of his life, and you can really see how he kind of latches onto anybody who tries to guide him and mentor him, as fathers normally would. Lou told him all about taking responsibility for their own actions and owning the things that they've done wrong, which is where he told him about D-Wiz, own your actions. His mother Rock may be a lot of things, but she did take that weight of putting Joyce out of her misery. Neither Lou or Marvin could bring themselves to do it, but she did. She took that weight. She took it for Marvin and she took it for Lou, and she did what needed to be done, which is the first time Kanan was hearing about what really happened with his grandma. But let's talk about Breeze. While Snaps and Pop were in the area, they wanted to introduce Kanan to their nephew, Branford Frady, also known as Breeze, the man, the myth, the legend. 11 years after he was first mentioned back in Power, that's how long some of us have been waiting to see Breeze. Well, he's finally here. Although with Snap saying that he's got the brightest mind, him being the boldest thinker that Kanan will ever encounter, let's wait and see. We know what was said about him back in Power. I played some of those clips at the beginning of the breakdown. He does give the vibes of someone who may be strong but not smart, but let's wait and see. He definitely is going to have a lot of influence on Kanan going forward, especially if Season 5 is the last and as we move into Power Origins. Now I know it wasn't a huge introduction or a explosive one, but I do think it was just right. They've got the perfect actor to play the role. Being the nephew of Snaps and Pop also gives him that bit more weight, again going back to legacy, because of who they are and what they've done, how much respect they have and how much they're feared. We're also never going to view Power the same ever again. We're now going to know who Breeze was, who Snaps and Pop were, who the Ultimate Big Dogs were, who introduced Breeze to Kanan. Everything definitely changes from now on. With that being said, let's move on to the war in Queens. Now this conversation really is important, because this is where Phil Russo revealed he did take a stab at Stefano, but he missed. He failed to finish Stefano, and now he knows. There's no choice but to go to war with Unique, because sooner or later Stefano is going to come for him either way. So he told Unique knock himself out, do whatever he's got to do in New York. Meanwhile with Rock, she was thinking the same. The stuff with Stefano didn't matter. They had to hit Unique and they had to hit him hard and fast. Which is where we saw Luke come for Panessa. He grabbed both Panessa and Jerome, and now they really do have some leverage come the beginning of Season 5. With Unique, we also saw him making his move. They were gearing up to hit Rock's operation, and anybody they could see in the streets that was connected to Rock. They burned down the Chinese restaurants, which were actually no good to Rock anyway, but they also came across Marvin, and he was someone who I did think would survive Season 4. I did always feel they could end on a cliffhanger of Marvin potentially being shot, and the question of whether he'll make it heading into Season 5. Especially because of how loved he is by Power fans, because of the little things like this, looking out for Amber, as he said he would. But he does survive, and he will be playing a big role in Season 5, as they try to rebuild and go after Unique, or, as I've been saying, the real big bad are the Italians, who have just been using these guys to fight their proxy wars for them. But with that being said, over to Kanan pulling the trigger on Rock. Now Garcia came to question Kanan about Crystal, because at the end of the day, this was her boyfriend. Of course, they were always going to come and question Kanan. Now he told him the exact same thing he told Jukebox. He gave the description of who was seen at the scene of the crime, and he immediately jumped to the conclusion of it being Rock, which Juke wasn't buying. We know she had this back and forth with Rock at the diner, but she's always had her doubts that Rock was involved, more so after Marvin told her there's no way Rock would have done that. Juke trusts Marvin more than anything in this world, and I do think she knew Kanan had the wrong end of the stick. It also does fall in line with my previous breakdown from earlier this week. They are setting up for Kanan to drift further away from Duke and the Thomases, and move more into Snaps, Pop, and Breeze's hands. We're really about to see that break and tear happen between Duke and Kanan's relationship, and it's all because of this. Kanan not being able to control his emotions, being manipulated by Snaps and Pop, and so much more. However, the world of Power really does come full circle. It does make sense why Kanan convinced Tariq why it had to be him who killed Ghost back in Power. The theme of son, father, mother shootings had to happen back in the 90s with Kanan, which started with him pulling the trigger on Howard back in Season 1. Now Rock actually tried to tell Kanan. She actually tried to come clean, or well, semi-clean. She knows the shit that she's done to him and everybody else was wrong. But the problem is, it's way too late. I said Rock should have sat down and had this honest conversation with Kanan a very long time ago, and had she done so, things would have been very different. However, D-Wiz, Fame, Crystal, Detective Howard, Kanan's only seeing one thing at this moment in time, which is Rock is to blame for each and every single one of them. He's let Snaps and Pop get into his head, and he ain't thinking straight. Like the older Kanan's narration said, you have to control your damn emotions and think before you pull the trigger. Now I know the question will of course be, does Rock survive? Straight off the bat I will give my prediction, just like I said Unique wasn't Breeze. I do think Rock will survive. I think this is going to be her Monet moment where she got shot back in Power Book 2 Ghost, where it is going to make her reflect on life a lot more. It's going to contribute towards the tear in Kanan and Duke's relationship, the relationship between Kanan, Lou and Marvin. It's going to have a ripple effect which will alter Kanan's course going forward, more so now that we've seen Breeze finally being introduced in the world of Power. With that being said, that's where I'm going to leave it for this one. I will be back tomorrow for my usual breakdowns and giving everybody an update in terms of what's next after raising Kanan. So drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section, and as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.